Just for the in general as a reminder.
Okay, well, thanks for making it in today, you guys. TGIF, happy Friday. We're picking up right where we left off today in the Strategic Communication Unit. And earlier in the week, we talked about a lot of the importance about when we're creating advertisements or we're trying to communicate strategically with audiences, that we often want a nice balance of rational appeals as well as some more maybe emotional or affective, so kind of cognitive and affective different types of appeals. All right? And we started just getting into more specific types of audience segmentation. And that's what we're going to talk about today more specifically, is target marketing. And then that will segue into more specific strategies that we can use and tactics. So we talked about we want overall goals for our advertisements and advertising campaigns. We then want strategies to reach those goals, and then we'll have specific techniques for those strategies. So we're kind of working our way down the rabbit hole here. So I thought today we'd kind of include a little bit of politics, since we're kind of now a little bit post-election here. Maybe we can breathe a little bit and talk about it in a safe space in the classroom, and especially related to target marketing. So earlier in the week we kind of focused on products. We looked at some classic advertisements and some original designs and appeals. And so today we'll kind of talk about politics a bit more and that type of strategic communication. So typically, advertising and PR does kind of break into these two main sections. So if you're thinking about going into StratCom, you might think, do I want to go into more products, more business, or more commercial, maybe more marketing, advertising? Or do I want to go into more social issues, political issues, human rights issues, maybe the environment, or things like that? It doesn't have to necessarily be a candidate per se, or a party. Politics is a broader category maybe than just that. Right? So we'll kind of look at some of those today. So with target marketing, maybe if you were watching the votes come in on election night, and you saw maybe the states and the country turning different colors, different shades, that I think was a great example of how big data today can really help us to find our target market, our audience that we've segmented. So this is when we take an audience and we cut it up into pieces so that we can specifically reach each one. And we talked about on Wednesday a little bit that this is usually based on demographics, certain variables that indicate that who that individual is as a person, geographics, right, their location, and then their psychographics, and more of their thought processes, their interests, hobbies, things like that. So interestingly, if you've now kind of watched some of the post-election analyses on television, they're talking a lot about how even in our state, just back in 2012 when we re-elected Obama, the state was a real kind of healthy mix of blue and red and kind of various shades of pink and purple then. Now, since that time, with Governor Walker bringing more conservative politics into the state and a new type of change that was promoted by Trump, we now see, this is the map that just came out in the journal Sentinel. We see a lot more red, red signifying Republican or more conservative leanings across the state. So really interesting. In just a few years' time, the state shifted from being about 50-50, or since we elected Obama then, the state did vote in favor of Obama, from more blue to red in just a few years, right? So when we think about these variables and how we target populations, it's important to remember that they're not stagnant, that they do change. So why do we segment these audiences? Well, advertising costs a lot of money, right? Especially if it's national or through major media channels. So we don't want to waste money on audiences that will never be interested in the product or the politician or the idea that we're trying to sell. So that's really important. It's hard to reach audiences in a massive way. So we really want to target those specialized markets, and they will have an increased likelihood that they will participate in our effort or buy our product. And so then we can really tailor our advertisement, our campaign, really specifically. Maybe here's an example for upper middle class urban men aged 24 to 26. That little phrase there has a lot of information in there. Upper middle class, that's a demographic. Urban, that's a geographic. Men, that's a demographic. Age 24 to 26, right? Another demographic variable. Very specific, right? So it's maybe not you guys yet, but just after graduation might be a few of the young men in here. Now that's very different from maybe middle class ex-urban, just outside the suburbs. Women, maybe a different age, right? So we can, and this doesn't even include those psychographic variables, so we can even tailor this more. So let's look at some how this kind of plays out in politics. Here's a general strategy that has been largely accepted by teaching basic politics and political strategy at an introductory level. There's typically kind of two routes in which you often want to bring in an audience. One way in which you can bring out the vote is through this idea of mobilizing your base. So you've got your Republicans, so for example, President-elect Trump, you know they're out there, but you know that a good chunk of them don't vote. We know that we have some low voter turnout in this country. So you can just make sure that absolutely every single Republican or conservative in the country is going to turn out for you. And this is a strategy that we've seen in several bids for the White House over the years, in just the 21st century. But this is kind of a classic, right? Kind of the classic way in which you can bring out your vote. Now, another way is to appeal to more independents or moderates, those who are maybe not in your base, but they're in the middle, or they're maybe outliers. And we saw Obama definitely do this with change, trying to bring in maybe African Americans who had not voted before or not part of the process. And maybe even Trump did some of that too in this recent campaign. The jury's kind of still out on exactly what that strategy was. But so we can kind of see here, right, Republicans on the right, Democrats on the left. We could really mobilize our base, get absolutely every single person to turn out because maybe they just haven't in the past or didn't feel the need to. Or maybe this year the Democrats did that. I do think kind of Clinton did that. She didn't seem to have a really emotional or huge change campaign or anything like that. I think she was appealing a bit more to moderates in the middle, trying to pull in women, and it didn't seem to work out for her, right? So maybe we kind of see these different strategies of reaching toward the middle at times, maybe trying to get independents, outliers, or just get every last single person who maybe sits on the couch and complains about government or has an idea, but never actually gets to doing that behavior, right? We talked about on Monday how in order to get that behavior in the end, we need to first give them knowledge, then we need to establish a positive attitude or an attitude toward the issue, and then finally get them to do a behavior. All right, so let's look more specifically at these three variables: demographics, geographics, and psychographics. So demographics, here's kind of some of the more traditional ways in which we might measure a person and kind of their qualities about them. Definitely their age, right? So you all are probably maybe in that 18 to 24 bracket, that kind of college, post-high school, maybe pre-real working world kind of area. Gender, of course, maybe your family status, your education, occupation, income, race, ethnicity. Religion is often in here as well. And now today, often having health insurance is included in here because that's a really good indicator of your class, besides just your income. Some of these can be very sensitive variables. When you're doing surveys, these are the questions you want to ask at the very end because sometimes people don't like to reveal their income, or they don't like to say, I only got a high school education, or things like that. So these are often variables that are asked at the end. Maybe some of you are doing your senior surveys and things, and you're dealing with a bit of this. So next is geographics, right? So this on its face might seem pretty self-explanatory. Your country, state, county, city. We think back to that map of Wisconsin and we look at, right, the different counties and ways they've named, right? That's definitely a great example of this. But we can also think more specifically, what kind of city is it? How large is it? Small, right? As a mid-sized city like Madison or much larger like Milwaukee. Different demographics of the region, and of course remember that change, the dynamics of change. Maybe there's growth or wealth, maybe different industries, like Milwaukee, right? What are some industries that we have in Milwaukee that are big? You want to think of any?
Brewing.
Brewing, of course, yeah. We're right on the Great Lakes, so there's, right, kind of some seaport work there and shipping. So that's maybe very different from other major cities that aren't in the Midwest. These might be different, have different kind of people living within them. So we can really think about, right, New York is of course very different from Miami, or, right, these are all, just because it's a big city doesn't also mean that the population is they're all going to be the same. So then lastly, probably another new target marketing approach to segmentation is psychographics. And if you recall, as we looked at the ads earlier in the week, we kind of looked at this buildup of advertising knowledge or theory of advertising over time, kind of starting first with demographics. Then we learned about geographic targeting through databases and through postal codes through that Florida's Prism. And then now, kind of in the 70s and on then, now a lot of the advertising has really started to focus into psychographics. So how are people thinking? Yeah, Jacob?
I wanted to point out that I think it's, well, the perfect example is you can't just look at demographics and geographics by themselves, because it's the combination of them two is what caused Trump to win, because normally people go for swing states because that's where all the independents are. So whoever has the most independents gets the most swing states, and that usually puts them over the top. Trump got most of the swing states, but Hillary still could have won if she just would have gotten Wisconsin and Michigan through the Midwest. But Trump got that, and the reason that is because that area is filled with Trump's largest demographic, white uneducated males. And that's why also people along the coast mostly went for Hillary, because Hillary's larger demographic is educated minorities, and that's really big along the coast. So people can't just say like, oh, we get the minority vote. You have to see where the minority vote is concentrated. And if it's only concentrated in one state, it doesn't matter if you're getting 97% of minorities.
Sure.
So I think that's the reason why Trump won those states, because Wisconsin and Michigan always vote Democrat, but because this specific election, Trump got the overwhelming demographic of that area.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he was pushed over the top compared to Clinton.
Sure, I think you're definitely right on the geographic of that, right? So, right, the maps clearly show that the more less populated rural counties were the ones that went red, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bit of a leap to say that that's an uneducated area, because a lot of those, maybe, right, there aren't universities in those areas, so maybe people come from those counties, but now they're living in the city, or they're living or going to school there. As well, remember, only a third of the US population has a 4-year degree. Only a third. So, so I guess, right, education has various levels. So we might say maybe they're not PhDs or whatnot, right? They're more working class, I think is a good way to say it, right? And so, yeah, I think you're definitely right. It's a combination of those psychographics and demographics. What I think is also really interesting in what you're saying is, I talked earlier about Obama change. Trump was promoting change too, right? For those people, he's saying you're tired of kind of not factory jobs having gone overseas.
Populist movement.
Yep, we're moving right toward that information, that knowledge economy we talked about. And those are maybe people who are kind of I think the word this week is the forgotten kind of population, who are kind of are not keeping up with kind of this new wave information technology of the 21st century. Yeah, so great example. So that where demographics and geographics really come into play. Yeah, Isabel?
I just had a question because obviously the election is technically over, but Hillary won the popular vote,
Yeah.
and the official electoral college vote has not happened yet. So I just had a question for you. If you think advertisements will still continue for the political campaign, or if they don't, do you think they should? Like, do you think it could be a strategy? Just because like the electoral college is technically still in, they're in the holding pen
Sure.
to vote.
Yeah. Well, so yesterday President Obama did meet with
Right,
Trump, and so I think that's a good signal that maybe we are still waiting for the official word. Excuse me, but I think we can pretty much, it's kind of a done deal. So I do doubt we'll see some of that advertising, especially because it does cost so much, right? I know with the Clinton campaign, I had read reports which shows also how wrong they were. They had projected, they cut their advertising in Wisconsin 2 weeks before the election date. They cut advertising for Feingold and for Clinton. They thought they had it in the bag. So, because it is so expensive, right? So I doubt we'll see more advertising after now. Sarah, do you have something to add?
Oh, I was just gonna add to what you had said about the demographics. They released kind of the demographics of what way people went, and all the different women this age, and yada yada yada. And one of them that was, because everybody's been perpetuating this, that it's uneducated white males that were voting for him, but something that kind of shocked me was that a lot of people who had college degrees that were white males did vote for him too, so it wasn't just the uneducated, it was also college educated. So
Yeah,
it was interesting to see that people have one thought in their head about who was voting for him, and then to see the actual breakdown of it.
This is a bit of an aside too, but I watched The Daily Show last night, and Trevor Noah made a great point. Looking back at this map here, he said, so despite some of the terrible things that Trump has said, which we can't deny, it's on record, remember that a lot of these people did vote for a black president some years ago. So just despite maybe some of the racial slurs we've heard, or some of the really negative things, don't attribute those qualities as well to people who voted for him, because they are wanting, they're sick of corrupt politics or things as usual. So it's important to remember that it's a much more nuanced, we can try. This is bringing up such a good point. We can really try hard to box people in, to stereotype them, to say you're from this county, so you vote this way, or you do this, or you think this way, or you voted for this person, so this makes you this, right? So I think this is a great example about how each of us, despite how maybe we try to target populations through these variables, everyone is definitely an individual. Great point. Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, that was kind of the point I was trying to make. I thought it was awesome to see it really was in a showcase of the ability to choose for yourself and choose for the country, whatever you please. Because it broke all lines of politics, the whole Eastern line, the wall that you used, Democratic wall into Ohio through Pennsylvania, that was broken just from, those rural, like we said, the rural areas coming out to vote too. But even the non-white vote was heavily swayed. It was just, it's so interesting to look at, like you said, you pigeonhole and you box a certain group into one area and think that's where you stay, but it is just free choice all over the lines.
Did you follow, Jacob?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, I wasn't saying that only uneducated people voted for Trump. I'm just saying that And I've seen multiple political analysts say the thing that pushed him over the top in the Midwest states is the concentration of an uneducated white voters and the fact that it is shown that there are significantly more people with a non-four-year degree in those states compared to, say, New York.
Sure.
So I was saying that was what I was getting at. That's what pushed him over in those normally Democratic states.
Right, and that bringing in a lot here, right? And so, of course, there are a lot more educated people in New York. There's such a huge, much larger population, right? I'd be curious what the percentage kind of is of right, related to that, but we've had fewer electoral votes in Wisconsin due to that too. So, yeah, thanks for clarifying that, that's good. Did you have something, Griff?
Can you go to someone else first?
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
Julia,
yeah,
I think you were.
I was just, thinking like on a mass communication note of like playing on demographics. They, like when I was watching a YouTube video, like the commercial before was like a Trump commercial and it was a veteran saying like, yeah, I voted for a black president last time. He goes, however, now a rich white man has my vote. So like, it's like kind of like saying like a lot of opinions like changed, I guess. And I think that was like very strategic and I think a lot of people seeing that like, it made them more comfortable with like their change, so like the whole different ways of targeting people, I think, was effective for him.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I think too, right, they were surprised, actually, not as many women voted for Clinton as I think most of us really expected them to, right? I mean, I was excited for our first, Madam President, but then a lot of females didn't end up voting for Clinton. So it is so much more nuanced. It's deeper than maybe superficial things like or just obvious indicators like gender.
I just have a question on the psychographics.
Oh, sure.
So would you say that the most effective way to gather that information is through like either focus groups or surveys, or do you think it's more like the advertising as an industry just continues to feed off of stereotypes or off of like, you know, the assumptions, I guess? Like, what is just your opinion on this?
Sure. I think it's kind of a bit of both. So I think first, definitely focus groups. That's kind of a classic, a great way, a video that we'll be watching really shows how focus groups work. And that'll be, I think, really great for us to see kind of how they can speak with individuals and extended interviews, not even just focus groups, but finding who your consumer is or who your target is and just finding out so much about that person. And it is very specific and tons of research goes into it, right? Because they're spending millions of dollars on these advertisements, right? They can't afford to just do kind of superficial, stereotypical, right, advertisements. But often what comes across, what we see, often looks to us a bit like a stereotype because they need to figure out how to connect their goal with us. And for example, right, we know that there are a lot of stereotypes on television or in movies and whatnot, but unfortunately, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of producers still have to rely to a certain degree on those stereotypes to show that this is this kind of person, so that we can kind of use a frame of reference for understanding something. So unfortunately, I think stereotypes, we'll see if they ever go away completely, or some of these kind of very broad categories and variables, but I think, so I think there's a ton of research that goes behind the advertising that we just don't know about, and then when we see it on TV, it appeals to us in a way that we can relate to, that might be kind of superficial on a level, but then it goes deeper. And so I would encourage you to do that with your advertisements, right? A great way for this paper coming up is to start with those geographics, psychographics, demographics, right? Demographics might be pretty superficial, it's a single white male or what, things like that. But then those psychographics, that's where it gets deeper. And that's where really the message construction, if you guys are really interested in advertising and want to be on like the creative team to figure out exactly what words do you use, what tagline, like I'm loving it, right? How did they come up with that? How did they come up with this, right, these very specific, what looks as very simple advertising, but is actually, there's so much going into it. Okay, so great point. Let's move back to psychographics here. So psychographics are really asking, what do people value? What are their attitudes toward this product, this politician, or related things in this area? How do people see themselves? Where are they at right now? How do I view myself? And then as I talked about earlier this week, more importantly, what do people want? What do they desire? We always want to be better, we have goals. So most often, advertisements are selling a lifestyle, or they're selling a goal that you can reach. They're not gonna sell you already what you have, because our aspirations as humans typically aren't what we already have. We have higher goals. So that's important, right, for advertising, I said. Remember, advertisements never want to satisfy us. They want to create a desire within us, a want, a need. And so we need to think about, what does that consumer want to be? Maybe we know it's a middle-class white male, but we know he wants to be more. And so how do we make him feel like we can give him more? Through a product, like Axe body spray that's gonna help him maybe go on dates, or through a politician who maybe thinks he can succeed financially. All right. So let's kind of think then a bit. We've already covered this to a certain degree. How might we differentiate Democrats and Republicans then through these variables? I think we covered it to a certain degree. Geographics, we talked about, I think maybe urban versus rural is a difference, right? Also, right, we know the coasts are more Democratic, and Midwest is often more, and South is more conservative. Demographics, we kind of talked about maybe some gender things here. We might think about income, or education levels, or religion. Religion is often a great indicator for politics. And then psychographics, how do people view the world? Obama, right, was selling change. Trump was also selling change, just a different type of change. Right? It was a different type of change being sold to different types of people. So selling kind of a very similar message, but through different populations, and then different psychographics that population had. Yeah.
I wanna touch on that change thing.
Sure.
It's interesting because I think the reason Trump was so successful was he did that change theme in what is many people call the populist movement, and that's why Bernie Sanders did so well too, was because he advocated for a large amount of change to fix the problems. Granted, it was in a different direction, but the American people associate with that populist movement of change for the better. That's what, and Obama focused on that too, and that's why he was successful. And I feel like Clinton never officially tapped into that populist, like for the people, idea, and that's why she was a little bit weaker compared to Trump in that aspect.
I saw a really interesting email. Someone forwarded me a speech of Bernie Sanders from a year ago, like last August, I think, and he said that he didn't foresee the Democrats winning this election unless they ran an emotional, very social movement type of campaign, similar to what Obama had done, really motivating the country and really making it a movement. And yeah, I think you're definitely right. Okay, so then we might think, how might some of this information be useful, right? Of course, definitely for maybe social issues. So if we're going beyond just get the politician elected, right? Maybe for specific programs in our area. A lot of us, when we voted, we also voted whether or not we wanted to allow higher taxes to go to support our schools. That was a measure on the ballot in Madison, I know. Were there any other ballot measures that you guys saw? Yeah, Taylor?
On mine in Janesville, there was one talking about, they said it wanted to get people behind a proposed amendment to Washington about whether or not restricting money that goes into campaigns is, like they wanna know if we felt that if you controlled the amount of money that went into campaigns, that was impinging on your First Amendment right to free speech. So it was saying, the amendment is money in corporations are not people, money does not include free speech, and it's like yes or no.
Oh, wow, okay, yeah, so
Wow.
definitely going back to that campaign fundraising issues, sure.
It wasn't, I voted here, but when I was looking at the bill for Illinois where I live, one of the referendums talked about, sick leave or medical leave. And the question is if you save it up, excuse me, if you could use it all at one time,
Oh.
kind of like vacation.
Mhm.
And it was, I didn't check, but it was favored to pass, and the reason is kind of piggybacking off bereavement leave. So if, now that they're saying that it's not just like a sick day that people are taking, like they're going to get sick for a while, so if they get like something like mono or like a strain of the flu, so they can't afford to take just like one day. So that was kind of like the idea behind the bill, or if they needed to leave because of like a family medical health, like, you know, your kid gets the flu, or your kid gets mono, or your mom gets sick. So that was favored to pass in Illinois.
Excellent, yeah.
I know that throughout the country there were two main sweeps. The first was like 7 states voted to successfully pass medicinal marijuana. Not all
I
states.
think
I know
California, it's
California
completely legal
did.
now.
Yep.
But I know 7 did medicinal, which truthfully after that, I think in the next 15 years it's just gonna be legal the way the whole country's moving.
Sure.
And there was
But-
actually 5 that legalized it fully recreational too in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
really?
I didn't
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's a
Amazing.
dispensary in
It's
Illinois.
pretty amazing.
So, and then the other one is that I don't know the number of states, but a good number of states went voted to either reinstate or start the death penalty again.
Mhm.
So, I know we went to, I know that was 2 big themes in this election across
Yeah.
the country.
Definitely. Even last spring, when we voted in the primaries, we also voted in Wisconsin for our next Supreme Court judge in Wisconsin. And a lot of people voted for their primary, but they hadn't done any research on the judges, and so they didn't vote for the judge at all. So these are great, really important. A lot of these ballot measures maybe affect us even more locally and personally than a lot of these other ones. All right, so definitely social issues, besides our candidates, are of course really important for targeting, but also even products. Can you guys think about maybe ways in which maybe Republicans are more likely to buy this type of product or Democrats this type of product? It's true. Here's some really interesting data that I found out of Chicago from Ogilvy and Mather about different types of cars that people like to drive. So let's see, we've got Republicans in blue and then Democrats in yellow. So Republicans are more likely to purchase a Land Rover, Isuzu, Plymouth, Lexus, Hummer, Porsche, GMC, Jeep, Jaguar, BMW. Over here we see Democrats more often purchase hybrids, Subarus, Audis, Geos, Mitsubishi, Kia, Hyundai, Honda, Pontiac, Volkswagen, Nissan, Toyota, Lincoln, all right? So we can even take these variables, which we might think are really only related to these social issues, but we can look at them and say, hey, these also trend in how people make different purchases, right? And we can, even today, right, a lot of people make purchases very consciously in terms of politics. Maybe they buy organic or fair trade coffee or recycled products, right? Here's another example for beers. Different beers that Republicans and Democrats drink. So again, Democrats are in yellow. Democrats more often drink cognac, Milwaukee's Best, brandy, malt liquor, Heineken, gin, tequila, natural light, Corona, Bud Select, Budweiser, vodka, rum, Rolling Rock, Miller High Life, let's see, Corona Light, Scotch whiskey is about in the middle, Bud Light, Coors Light, those are kind of in the middle. Then we see Sam Adams, more Republicans drink, any whiskey, Coors Light, Busch Light, bourbon, Sam Adams, Amstel Light, Michelob Ultra. Okay, interesting, all right? So we can see with products even, maybe how people lean kind of one way or the other. All right. So let's try this ourselves, all right? Let's kind of apply these demographics, geographics, and psychographics to a brand, all right, to a product, all right? So looks like we got about 4 rows here, so let's do 4 groups. And think about, if you're hired by this brand, how are you going to market it, right? Just the Cubs just won the World Series, right? So how are we gonna market this beyond what it already is? Okay, so we know kind of about the Cubs brand already. How are we going to make it stronger? Where might there be growth for this brand? Literally, where? Okay, so geographically, maybe online as well, or things like that, right? So where? So, among what kinds of people? What demographics? Okay, what demographics might these audiences have? And then, what might you want to communicate to each of these audiences? So with their psychographics, what are you going to try to tell them about the Cubs brand? All right? So let's take about 5 minutes, get into your groups, and talk about kind of each of these things. Who do you think you might want to target? Okay?
I will do.
Alright,
So,
yeah, we gotta look at demographics.
I feel like so many.
The demo's gonna have to deal with age, gender, status, education.
Where might there be growth?
Race.
not in Chicago.
Okay, so age, what's the age range?
I would say all ages because, especially Wrigley Field is like known as like the fan-friendly field and just for like soccer.
Okay, but maybe.
So that's why I wanted
All age, and all age.
Yeah, once they're
Well,
there,
yeah.
All right.
Literally, that's the only thing that.
Stay tuned, a lot of times, like, if you're